How far into who I am? Like brief, like two
Let,
minutes.
2 minutes or less. Well, we can get into. And good morning. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. Today I am joined by Sarah Hacker. She's running for a position that is really important for every county here in California. We were lucky enough to have Lisa Smitkamp as our DA, and she protected our freedom during a lot of this COVID tyranny because the DA decides when to prosecute, when it is an actual crime. So today I'm joined by Sarah Hacker. Before we get to the intros, though, I always do my opportunities to get involved. May 19th, tonight, the Clovis chapter of Constitutionalists for California is having their Clovis meeting. We're at 508 4th Street at the American Legion Hall in Old Town Clovis. If you believe in freedom, please join us. We generally have a lively discussion. Don't have a speaker this week. We often do. May 22nd, Sunday, there's a medical freedom rally at Blackstone and Nice. All this COVID tyranny isn't over. There were 10 bad bills. We got a lot of them put on hold. It did not make it through the legislature, but they're only on hold, I think, largely because it's an election year. I truly believe that the government wants to be able to tell us what to do, when to do it, what to think, what to say, how to speak. There's a lot of authoritarian tendency. Standing against that is your medical freedom, or a key element to standing against that. Final thing going on, the Kingsburg chapter of Constitutionalists, May 24th, that is a Tuesday night, is meeting at 6:30 p.m. at 15,000 Rose Avenue. They're going to have a roundtable discussion. Should be lively, should be fun. We were supposed to have somebody running for Fresno City Council speaking, but for some reason he had a conflict. Anyway, moving on. Spreading a little beyond Fresno County. Welcome. This is Sarah Hacker.
Hello. Good morning, everybody.
So, Sarah, why are you doing this?
Well, I believe in justice, truth, freedom, and I am the candidate that's going to stand up and protect all of the members of Kings County with those ideals and values. I am a San Joaquin Valley native, grew up in Fresno, and almost 20 years ago I moved to Hanford, where I've made my home there ever since. I love Hanford, I love Kings County, and I love working for truth and justice there. I am currently a partner at a law firm here in Kings County, Diaz Law Firm. It's one of the largest law firms here. And I have the opportunity to practice all different types of laws. But my heart lies in prosecution and enforcing our laws, protecting victims, and prosecuting criminals. Protecting our public safety is the most important. And I've been called to do so because I've seen what's been going on in the Kings County District Attorney's Office over the last 7 years. And justice has not been served. And somebody needs to stand up and protect the rights of those in Kings County.
Well, that's a big deal. Just for the record, so that people know, your opponent is Keith Fagundes, if I'm pronouncing his last name right. And he is the current DA, and you say he's been there for 7 years, so it's 4-year terms?
Correct.
Who do you support for Attorney General?
Anne-Marie Schubert.
I've met Anne-Marie. I actually am supporting her. She's not technically a Republican. She's a no-party preference person. I'm actually okay with that for that position. The reason I ask that is because a lot of people have decided that just what letter behind your name is the most important thing, and I think value is the most important. Last week I did a show on what happened at the Republican National Convention, not National, State Convention. And there were a lot of games. And I don't believe that a lot of those people represent my values because I'm actually conservative. So in this particular position, while I would care if somebody is a conservative. Most importantly, I want somebody who's the law. You also worked for the DA, for the previous DA. Saying,
Yes, I was a prosecutor from
okay.
2006 to 2015, and there I prosecuted the violent crimes, and I was one of the head prosecutors there. But I agree with you. I think that it's not just about whether or not you have an R or a D or an I or an NPP behind your name. What we really need to look at as voters is this person truly going to serve us? For example, in our race, there are two Republicans running. Fagundes is a Republican, and I'm also a Republican. But the difference between the two of us is I'm going to serve everybody in Kings County, and I'm going to follow the law.
Well, that's important. I went to the debate, what was that, about 3 weeks ago?
May 2nd.
Exactly. Okay, I'm pretty close.
Yeah.
Where both you and the current DA, Fagundes, essentially had a debate. It wasn't really a back and forth debate. You were asked the same questions. It was interesting to me how much he bristled when he was accused of being part of the Good Old Boys network. His body language changed. It was no longer believable to me. Well, if you're watching this, Keith, because I know you want to come on, but I'm going to call you on this. You come on. It was also very interesting to me at the end, he made a whole point of talking about how he was a victim. And I'm thinking, you're a pretty strong politician and made a point of beating your chest and talking like you're a tough guy, and suddenly you're a victim. It didn't make a lot of sense to me.
It didn't make a lot of sense to me either. Frankly, he looked like a maniac up there. He was very agitated. He was grabbing the podium. He was speaking very forthright. And I think that your argument, your note about how he was beating his chest is very accurate. He couldn't contain himself. And it was because he was confronted with the truth. He is a good old boy. He is the poster boy of the Good Old Boys Club in Kings County. And it's clear that he's been serving the Good Old Boys Club for the last 7 years.
I know in the crowd you had judges that maybe don't publicly want to be known, but there were several judges on your side, clearly making a statement, even if they didn't want to, whether they endorsed or not. It also seemed to really get under the skin that Sheriff Robinson has endorsed you.
Yes.
I mean, he made several nasty little statements firing back at the sheriff.
Yes, he made a lot of personal attacks on the sheriff, questioning his integrity. And he showed his true colors. He cannot work with the sheriff. He cannot work with law enforcement because he's going to put himself first. And we saw that example that night. I've worked with a lot of these judges. My entire practice has been spent in Kings County, so I've worked with all of these judges as bench officers, and many of the judges came from the DA's office at the same time I was working there. So I've had a long experience with many of the judges as co-workers and colleagues, in addition to appearing in their court. The fact that they showed up and they sat on my side of the room is very telling.
Right, and I talked to some of them. I'm positive of these folks. I don't want to name names because I'm not sure whether they want that to become a public issue, but I talked to some.
Yes, and they've lost confidence in the district attorney. They don't trust him to do the right thing. And that's why we need to change. We need to restore the confidence back into our system.
I know that he was basically taken off the case on 7 different cases because of a conflict of interest. Recused is the right word?
Correct. He was recused from 7 cases, and it wasn't because he acknowledged that there was a conflict of interest. a judge had to stand by and look at what was happening, and the judge was the one that ordered him off those cases because of conflict of interest.
His attorney then stated that it really didn't mean anything because those cases weren't decided. And I thought, well, either this guy's blowing smoke or he's not a very good attorney, because obviously those cases would not be settled. He was removed because of the conflict of interest so that those cases could go forward and be judged in a fair way.
Absolutely correct. The problem with that situation is our current district attorney had hired his personal attorney to represent him in a sexual harassment lawsuit that was filed based on actions that the district attorney took against one of his male subordinates. And when you hire somebody to represent you, that means that that attorney is going to have loyalty towards their client. But that attorney can't represent another client that is against their own client.
There's a conflict of interest.
There's two sides of this equation that the attorney has loyalty to. And what happened was the district attorney made some very advantageous deals for his personal attorney at the detriment of Kings County. And these deals were so serious. One of them was a gang-related 4 counts of attempted homicide with a firearm. The defendant was looking at 140 to life.
Wow.
And the district attorney offered 10 years. Nobody in Kings County is served with a sentence like that.
Well, he made a real point of telling us all that he was a conservative. And it doesn't seem like a conservative thing to do.
Absolutely
that
not.
seems like soft on crime, except it doesn't seem to be consistent across the board.
You're right. It is soft on crime, but it is soft on crime with a bias. And that's the problem. And a true conservative, somebody that really believed in the Constitution, would take their responsibilities under that Constitution so seriously in offering deals or settlement agreements that not only serves the public, but also the victim. And he absconded from that obligation. That is not a conservative or a constitutionalist thing to do.
Well, it is very true that the victim is the person forgotten.
Absolutely.
Very frequently when it comes to crime.
There are 4 people that almost died by the hands of that defendant. And our current district attorney honors their sacrifice, the experience they have with a 10-year deal. That's unacceptable.
It definitely doesn't sound good. I noticed that the first question when I went to that debate, you pointed out that you were a prosecutor, not a politician, and talked about being objective and fair. And he talked about hard work, shows up, and he's accessible. Now, that really leads me to go, what? Because I wrote notes on this. I was there. What a tale of 2 cities. Or there'd be 2 different counties with different DAs.
No kidding. And to be honest with you, we all should be showing up for work every day. That's not a selling point. I mean, that's the bare minimum.
Mm-hmm. Well, showing up for work, hard work, I do respect, but accessible is good. But, by very definition, that job calls for being fair, being objective, applying the law equally. Obviously, you have to make choices because there's limited resources, so if you don't have a good case, sometimes you can't go forward because something happens. So you got to be careful as to which ones you go forward with. There was a big case that he went forward with that has to do with a woman on meth. You want to talk about that case?
Yeah, there was actually 2 cases like that. There's 2 women. One is Chelsea Becker, and the other one is Adora Perez. Both of them were using meth while pregnant. And unfortunately, during their pregnancy and late during the pregnancy, they lost their babies. The district attorney chose to move forward with those pregnancy or with those prosecutions and charging both of those women with murder.
Now, what does the law say about this?
The
Because I
law,
know where my opinion is, but there's a difference.
there is a difference because I think everybody can say that using meth while pregnant is absolutely despicable and horrific, and that never should happen. Unfortunately, there's no law against it. And to charge somebody with something as serious as murder, because we're talking a life offense. If this person is found guilty, they're spending the rest of their life in prison. And to charge somebody with something so serious that does not fall under the law is, again, an absconding of his duty. Because as the district attorney, you have to follow the law. Otherwise, we have chaos. We'll have a law in San Francisco that's enforced, and then a law in Fresno County, and a law in Maricopa County, and a law in LA County, and it will all depend on who the DA is. That's not how our system of justice is created, and it's absolutely unconstitutional to have one person decide what the law is.
What finally happened with that case?
It was dismissed by Mr. Fagundes a week after the debate.
Because he was so strong and bragged about it, and then pulled in some other kind of ancillary points that were red meat to the crowd.
Oh, he gave the crowd what he wanted to give them. But in the truth, he knew that case had no merit, but he strung them along. And then he dismissed the case because he knew that it was against the law to prosecute it.
See, I see it as horrific in one of those cases where I imagine it should be against the law, but if the law has not caught up with current situations, I don't know what you do. And I don't think the right choice is to take the law in your own hands, especially not when you are the chief. I can't say law enforcement officer. How would you describe the DA? Well,
He's the prosecutor in the county.
Okay, chief prosecutor in the county. Now, in some ways, he talked about how he didn't actually use the word chief law enforcement officer, but he talked about it as if he was.
Yes, he has referred to himself as the top cop or the chief law enforcement officer in the county. So if you go to the county's budget,
right, I've seen that in writing. I just was meant at the debate. He didn't say it quite that way.
No, he's kind of backed off of that lingo, but in the past he's always referred to himself as the top cop or the chief law enforcement officer, which I think is laughable because he's not a cop. He's not a law enforcement officer.
All he can do is, once the evidence is presented to him from whichever law enforcement agency, he can act from there.
Agreed. Yes, that is his constitutional mandate, and for him to go beyond that exceeds the scope of his authority.
When a decision's tough for you, where's your foundation? What do you go back to help make that decision?
The law.
It's not a wrong answer. We so frequently have politicians elected, and then they get in office, and because they don't have a strong moral center, they get corrupted. I see that a lot, that their values no longer are applied.
So there's a saying, and I've heard this multiple times during this election: power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. And when we have somebody that thinks that they know, or they can interpret, or they can do whatever they want because they think that the community wants it, we have somebody going rogue or renegade. And there's nothing that constrains that person. But when you have a DA that stands by the law and the words that are written into that law, that is a balance of power. And there's nothing more constitutional than having checks and balances. And that's why I stand by the law. I will always stand by the law. Because if you don't stand by the law, you're going to end up with vigilante justice.
Now, here's where it might get a little difficult. You know, we've got it set up where there's the federal constitution. You've got a state constitution. I assume those two basically agree. They don't contradict each other. Where we run into trouble is some of the laws passed, it's highly questionable where you stand. What do you do when you're in that gray area? Because sometimes, you know, to have it all the way taken all the way to the Supreme Court might be 10 years to
Absolutely.
adjudicate what that actual answer is. What do you do?
Absolutely. So, little known fact about me, I love researching Supreme Court justices. And I know, I'm a total geek.
No, I'm laughing because I don't do Supreme Court justices, but similar things.
Yes, and I love looking at the way that they take on a case and interpret the law and what values they use. And my favorite by far is Justice Scalia. God rest his soul. But his interpretation of the Constitution relied on the words. He was a strict constructionist. And what I really like about Scalia is that he stuck by the law. He stuck by the words. He could appreciate that there were other interpretations, but when he always came back to what was this law intended to do?
Well, and what was the original intent of the founders? Because he often would, you know, saw him in interviews and things where he talked about he went back and he read the Federalist Papers and things like that. He went for additional information to get a clearer idea of what they really meant.
Correct. And that is the way a law should be interpreted. I strongly stand by Scalia's legacy of following the law, following the original intent. It is not about my personal opinion, and it's not about what I think might be popular or throwing red meat at the crowd.
Well, I think for this particular position, that is important.
Absolutely, it is, because I'm responsible for enforcing the laws. And if we went by what I felt like on Monday morning, that's the scary thing. Because nobody would be able to predict what the law was if we're going by personal feelings. That's why we have to fall back on the Constitution.
And I do think that occasionally you run into what in your gut you feel is right and what the law is. They're not always exactly the same.
No, it's true, because we all have personal and moral beliefs, and we'd like to interpose our personal or moral beliefs on our jobs, and to some extent it happens, but what the voters are voting for is somebody that's going to fairly enforce the law equally amongst all members of Kings County.
Are you endorsed by any of the other DAs in the surrounding counties, or are they kind of just staying out?
They are staying out. But I was also endorsed by retired Chief, Lemoore Police Chief Daryl Smith, and I was endorsed by the Kings County Detention Deputy Association.
Because Keith Fagundes mentioned quite a number of law enforcement groups that he said are all supporting. You said that there might be some issues.
Yeah, because he was double counting one of them, or at least triple counting one of them. So he says that he was endorsed by the Hanford Police Officers Association, which, by the way, came down to a very close vote, and it was one vote would have made a difference. He also says that he was endorsed by the California Correctional Peace Officers Association for each of the 3 prisons in Kings County, but it was one organization that endorsed him. So when he said three prisons, it made it seem like there were 3 organizations. More importantly, there's only one police chief that has endorsed him, and that is the Corcoran police chief. But everybody else has remained silent. And that's telling in and of itself. When you have the Hanford police chief, who's worked with the DA for the last 7 years, stay silent. After he endorsed him in 2018, won't endorse him this race. The Lemoore police chief, silent. The Avenal Leadership Police Association, silent. The Corcoran Police Officers Association, silent. Lemoore Police Officers Association, silent. The Deputy Sheriff's Association, silent. And these are all associations that endorsed him in 2018, but they will not endorse him today.
That is a cataclysmic shift.
It's most definitely. And it only goes to show that our current DA cannot work with law enforcement in a positive way. Because if it was truly a good and positive relationship, why wouldn't they endorse him this election cycle?
That is a very good question. I purposely allowed some silence there because I want people to think about that for a minute. You made kind of an interesting point before we got started about when you go to law school and how they teach you the language, and it almost shifts your perspective. I'll share that because I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yes, it's true, because reading a book is different, or reading a magazine is different than reading the law. And when you go to law school, it's almost like they beat the common sense out of you. And they start putting in really long words like heretofore and whereas and foregone. These are words nobody ever says. And lawyers have to learn how to use them. And it makes us a little geeky.
Well, I love that idea that it beats the common sense out of it.
Yes, unfortunately.
Because, there are good lawyers, but by and large, you have a bad rap. You're kind of seen in the category of used car salesman. I know that's not entirely fair because there are absolutely good ones. But the slimy ones that fit with used car salesmen, there's also quite a number of those.
Unfortunately, they do change. They do give us a bad rap, and it's too bad. But there's a lot of really good lawyers, and a lot of them are prosecutors that devote their lives and their careers to protecting public safety.
Public safety and getting justice for innocent victims.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine. I am glad that there are people that protect criminals. Though I get that sometimes people are completely innocent. Just because you're a defense attorney, not everybody's guilty. But a large portion of the time, all they're doing is getting the best deal they can for the criminal that they're representing.
A lot of the times, yes. But defense attorneys have their constitutional place. When you think about it, our Bill of Rights, we have the 10 original amendments, and 4 of them apply to criminal justice and ensuring that the government does not overtake the rights of the individuals who are being criminally charged.
So 4th, 5th,
6th, and 8th.
Okay, got it. Wouldn't have got to 8th, but if I read it, I would have caught it. But I haven't read those. I need to read all of it again. One of my favorite things to do, if I just am driving, because you can't read while you're driving, is I find something from Hillsdale College, and I listen to their take on the Constitution. I find it highly entertaining.
It's an amazing document. People should spend more time studying it, and every time I go back to it, I always take away something new, and it leaves me with an appreciation of our system of government. The Founding Fathers were amazing, strong people, and they revolutionized government.
Now, I want to point out, I forgot an event. This Saturday, there's the Kingsburg Swedish Festival. And if you come out and see the Constitutionalist for California table, I'll be out there. You can get a free Constitution. We can talk about the Constitution.
I would love that. That sounds great.
So not just you, but anybody that comes to that festival, we will have free Constitutions, and we'll be happy to talk to you.
Well, you'll probably see me there.
I hope so. When it comes to abortion, we've got a big mess because that brief was leaked. Are we going to figure out who leaked it, first of all?
We'll see.
What are the implications for being able to fairly apply the law when judges' opinions before they're even finalized are leaked?
It was a tragedy that that opinion was leaked. It's important for the people who are the final say so in our government to have the space to make a decision without having public opinion encroach upon their right to go through the evidence and go through the law and make a decision. And the fact that that document was leaked was a huge travesty. It was a violation of the trust that we have in our government. Public opinion should never be involved in these big Supreme Court decisions. And I hope that, one, this never happens again. This is a terrible precedent to settle. And two, I hope that the Supreme Court justices do not change their opinion or buckle under the pressure of public opinion.
We're going to come back to that. We're going to go ahead and take a break. So we're going to go ahead and take a break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. Hey, if you're watching me on any of the social media platforms, if you like what I'm doing, please like, please subscribe. We have a country to save, and I try to bring light to issues. I try to bring both education, and I hope that I also get people, once they're informed, to move into action. Because one of my favorite quotes is from Ben Franklin: "You now have a republic, and you keep it." Well, we have a responsibility to keep it if you want these freedoms. If you want authoritarian government, and I think the Ministry of Truth was a step towards that. I know they called it the Disinformation Board, but let's face it, it was a Ministry of Truth. You wouldn't have to make any decisions if the government tells you what to think and how to say. And they want to define things as hate speech as speech that they hate, rather than what's happening with, rather than having an open arena of ideas. We're going to go ahead and come back. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. Today I am joined by District Attorney candidate for Kings County, Sarah Hacker, and we were having a discussion on what's happening with the Supreme Court. One of the biggest things that concerns me is now protesters are outside the homes applying pressure, political pressure, to what should be decisions made by applying the law, by looking at the Constitution. Political pressure is fine if you're in the legislative branch. It's not so much when you're in the judicial. Do you think there should be consequences for those people out there protesting?
That's a tough question, because I'm torn between protecting somebody's First Amendment right to speech and to association. But the other side of that coin is they never should have known what the opinion was in the first place. And unfortunately, we had somebody with bad intent leak a document to the public that was never should have been leaked.
Well, it looks like if it becomes the law of the land, what they will do is they will turn it over to the states.
Possibly, yes.
Again, I'll let you finish because you're more of a legal expert than I am.
The other side of the coin is there may be federal laws that are passed,
which then, depending on how they were written, might have to go to the Supreme Court to decide their constitutionality.
Probably. This thing will never this thing will never end. But yes, it could either go to the Congress to make decisions, or it could go to each individual state.
as much as I don't like abortion, and I think it starts from first trimester's wrong, just plain wrong. Second trimester, it's wrong and evil, and third trimester, in my eyes, it's wrong and evil. We still have to look at what is the law of the land. If we don't like it, we have been given an opportunity with how our laws are written, how we can affect our legislatures to change those laws, to change it. It scares me a little bit that the Supreme Court can decide some things that are not just interpreting the law, but like Chief Roberts just decided that the healthcare mandate that for the Obamacare, just he created it out of thin air. What do we do with justices like that?
Activist judges are very scary to deal with because you never know what you're going to get with an activist judge. That's why it's so important for our judges as well as people in the executive branches like the district attorney to follow the law. Because if we follow the law, then there's consistency. When you have activist judges, there isn't consistency. And you have one person deciding for a whole society what should be done and what shouldn't be done.
So you would consider the DA's office to be part of the executive branch?
Yes.
I'd never thought of it in those terms. Not wrong, just an interesting way to look at it.
Yes. The district attorney's office is a constitutional, it has a constitutional mandate because we will be in charge of prosecuting laws, and that means that we enforce the laws, which is an executive function. And like I've said before, I take that executive function very seriously, and I will stay in my lane. I will not be an activist DA, regardless of what I think the community wants or what may work in my gut, because that's not what is serving Kings County. What serves Kings County is somebody that's going to enforce the law.
When I looked at Keith's website, the first thing that comes up, the first article you can really read, talks about him and Strickland, which was interesting. I'm like, this is pretty out of date. Why is this first? And then he talked about, it's a little article about how he basically politically trounced Strickland. Why would that be your first thing? And I will ask him that if he comes on the air.
It's very telling, actually, because it shows that what he thinks is a success is to politically trounce somebody. And he is celebrating his prowess as a politician. If you look at his website, there's very little as to the successes that he's had as a prosecutor.
There were a few things. I think there were 4.
But very little. And it only goes to show that prosecution is not a high priority for him. That's why he needs to go.
Well, I don't know him personally, and I've only seen him at the debate, and I briefly was introduced to him, but he left me with more questions than answers after that debate. Now, that doesn't mean that I couldn't get those answers, but he left me with more questions than answers. It was strange to me that when pushed, his body language shifted so dramatically that he got so bothered by being called on some things, and that he then felt the need to circle back and talk about how he was a victim after being called out on those things. I don't know, that's just weird.
He's not used to being challenged. And if you go back and you look at prior videos where he's been challenged before, you can tell that he gets extremely agitated. And what I'm thinking of is his interview on Channel 30 Action News after the sexual harassment lawsuit came out. He got before Channel 30 Action News and gave an interview about how the 5,000 text messages he sent to Robert Waggle were just guy banter. And you see that same shift from confident to aggressive. He just doesn't. He's not okay with being challenged.
Okay, but if you're a prosecutor and you had to go before a court and you got challenged, what would you do? I mean, every good lawyer is supposed to be able to have clear, cogent arguments no matter what's going on around them.
Exactly. You have to stay poised and in control of yourself, because once you get agitated and upset, all of a sudden you're making the problem about you. And when you're the prosecutor of Kings County, it's always about the citizens of Kings County.
Why did you choose Kings County? Why did it become your home?
I love Kings County because it's a small community. It is a great place to live. When I left Fresno to go to college and I came back from law school, it became such a big city, big metropolis. I hardly figured out how to get around. I left in 2003 and there was a big, huge housing boom. And
Yeah.
I came back in 2006 and looked around and couldn't find my way around town. And I enjoy that small town feel, because when you have a small community, people watch out for each other and they take care of each other. And Hanford's a perfect example of that.
I understand that. I live in Clovis, which is a bit bigger, but I have lived in small towns and I know what you're talking about. It is kind of nice that everybody knows everybody.
It is very nice.
It is kind of a pain in the butt in some ways, but it also keeps you on the straight and narrow a bit because everybody knows.
There's definitely accountability for sure, but it also makes sure that people are polite and kind to each other, because if you have to keep running into the same person over and over again, you're going to get a bad reputation if you're grumpy. In LA, you can get away with that because you're probably never going to run into the same person twice. But here in Kings County, everybody knows everybody. It's 2 degrees of separation.
Mm-hmm. I lived in a much smaller town than that, outside of Marysville, in a town called Browns Valley, and there's 1,000 people. So while I didn't know all of them because I wasn't up there for more than like 5 years, I knew most of them. And if I didn't know them, I knew 4 or 5 people that we knew in common and probably had some relative in common if we kept talking.
Yeah, that tends to happen in these small towns. The other flip side of this is we never have to pay for parking and we never have to deal with traffic.
Yeah. And you can get almost everything you want.
Yes, now that we have Amazon, absolutely.
I try not to give money to Amazon because they're all about politics.
They are, unfortunately.
They do a great job, good service. I don't want businesses, especially mega corporations, to have much to do with politics.
And I have to admit, there's a lot of corporations that are getting involved in the politics, which is unfortunate because people use them for their products, not for their political beliefs.
I think Disney's a great example of that, where they decided what politics should be, dramatically shifted things, and decided telling people this is the way it's going to be, and people went, no thanks, I won't go to Disneyland. No thanks, I'll sell my stock. No thanks, you don't need a special deal in Florida.
Yes, and it's unfortunate that what they do is they influence our next generation with their movies and their content.
And they used to be, for most of the history of the country, their company. They were just somebody that got entertainment. If they gave a message, it was something kind of benign and positive. It was an escape. And a lot of entertainment has not allowed that escape.
No, it's gotten very politicized. So you may not know this about me, but I love football. It's my favorite thing to do in the fall is to follow football. I got a fantasy.
Wait, you're not a player?
I don't know. No. Maybe someday when I grow up. But I love the teams. I love having a fantasy football league. It is so fun. But I remember back in 2020 when we had so many changes And I remember looking forward to the football season and the first opening game, seeing all of these players make political statements, whether that be that they take a knee during the anthem or they have some kind of message on their uniform. And I just thought to myself, look, people, we got enough going on right now. We don't need your political ideology in our entertainment.
Mm-hmm. And I'm very much on the right, but I'm with you on that one. Football isn't my sport. I prefer squash, which almost nobody even knows what it is, or basketball. I don't watch any basketball. I can still watch squash because it's a two-player game. I was an avid player for a lot of years. Not great, but had a lot of fun. But there's no politics in squash. What there is in basketball, and I have not watched a game since they decided they needed to put BLM all over the court.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate.
Now, I'm going to circle that back and say, well, how does that connect to what's going on with the DA's office? Is it politics?
It's a huge connection. Because when you think about it, we don't want our athletes coming in and giving us their political beliefs and their ideology when they're playing football or basketball or whatever sport they're playing. Because what we're paying them for is to be entertained. And when they get on the court or the football field or the baseball diamond, they're working. They have to set aside their personal beliefs or whatever agenda they might have because they're on the job. And it circles back to this particular race because when I'm the DA, I'm going to be on the job. And Kings County isn't paying me to give my political ideology or agenda. They're paying me to enforce the law, to protect the public, to protect victims, and to prosecute criminals. And you have to put that aside in order to effectively do your job. Otherwise, you're just a talking head like Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody wants to hear from him. Not even the NFL.
A small number of woke leftists want to hear from him, but otherwise, I think the majority of everybody just wants him to go away.
Exactly. And we don't need athletes taking advantage of their platform as an athlete to influence people's thoughts or opinions because that's not what they're being paid for.
Well, you have the most interesting position if you were elected because you have a political position, politically elected, for an office that I hope would be largely non-political. How do you walk that tightrope?
Well, technically, it's a nonpartisan position. But unfortunately, it's one of those things that is an elected position. And I have to present myself to the voters on what I'm going to do and my plan for Kings County. And I've moved towards showing Kings County what my priorities are. For example, cracking down on agricultural theft is going to be a huge priority in my administration.
Well, I assume most of the time when there's an agricultural theft, it's more than $950, so you can actually do something.
That we can actually do something. But oftentimes that people don't actually get punished. And that's a change that I'm going to be making. People need to sit in a jail cell when they pull out $10 worth of copper wire and destroy a machine worth $50,000.
Well, it's $50,000 worth of damage there.
$50,000 worth of damage. And that's a farmer that won't be able to use that machine.
Mm-hmm.
It's a dairyman that won't be able to pull the milk from the cow. That affects us as Kings County residents in a huge way because it affects our economy. That's why agricultural theft is going to be a huge priority. And I will devote a DA investigator to ensuring that agricultural theft is properly investigated and to ensure that victims are heard and they have an opportunity to ask for restitution.
How many people are working under you now at the Diaz Law?
About 25.
How would that be different if you were to move into the DA's office?
There's approximately 80 employees at the DA's office.
So it would be more complex, but it essentially, you've managed a reasonable number of people, so it should be doable.
Yes, it will be doable. And I know all of the positions in the job. I've worked as a prosecutor throughout and handled almost all of the assignments. I've worked with investigators very closely. I worked with the clerical staff very closely. I understand how the job works. I know how the different employees work with each other, and we can make a great team.
One of the articles I read talked about a lot of turnover in the DA's office. Now, obviously, if Keith Gundes was here, he would say that was not true. From your perspective, where does that stand?
It's a massive rate of turnover because when you think about the DA's office of 85 people and you lose 70 people in 7 years, you've almost replaced the entire office in a period of 7 years.
Unless they were all significantly older and retired, that's a huge turnover.
And they weren't.
That's a McDonald's level turnover.
Exactly. And they weren't older people that were retiring. These are people that are just coming in and out. It's a rotating attorneys in and out, in and out. And even since that article that you mentioned, there's been 4 additional attorneys that have indicated that they're going to be leaving or have already left.
That is a big deal. We're going to take our final break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. When we come back, I want to focus on, because we're down to about 8 minutes, I want to focus on hope and solutions. So we're going to go ahead and come back. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. Today I am joined by Sarah Hacker, and we are discussing what's going on in Kings County. She is running for the DA position, district attorney position, and she's a first-time candidate. Sarah, what solutions are there? Why would you jump into this? I mean, I've already lost my hair getting nuts over all this. You know, at least you still have your hair.
Thank goodness. Definitely not going for the Sinead O'Connor look. No. I have a lot of hope for the future because I know that I can do a better job. I manage 25 employees now with our law firm. We have had very little turnover in the last 2 years or 3 years since I've become a partner. And that was even through COVID. We really have not had any changes in our staff, and I think a big part of that is promoting a good working environment, understanding that there is a balance between work and life, treating your employees with respect and dignity. That's huge. That's not happening at the district attorney's office right now. And when you have unhappy employees, they're not going to stay.
No, they're always looking for another opportunity.
They're looking for another job.
They may not be gone right away, but they're looking.
Exactly. And if I were to be elected, I would bring in that integrity, that work ethic of celebrating my employees' successes and treating people with dignity and respect and making the office like a family. Where I understand that there is a balance between work life and home life. You can't constantly run your engine all the time. You got to turn it off. You have to enjoy your family. You have to remember why the world is really a wonderful place. And ideally, I don't know how many people are going to be in the office if I get elected on January 2023 because there's such a high rate of turnover. I'm not sure what I'm going to be walking into.
So this is not a June 7th election?
It is a June 7th election,
okay.
But I will not take the position until January 2023. So I don't know what the office is going to look like when I walk through the door. We've had such a high rate of turnover. I mean, like I said before, even since the time that you read the article announcing that there was 70 people that have left, there's an additional 4 that have either turned in their notice or have stopped working at the DA's office. But I'd like to get to a point where we can get the office stabilized, have people settle in, want to stay, and we can start working on specialized prosecutions. Most importantly, I want to see a homicide team. Right now, there really isn't a homicide team at the district attorney's office, and it shows. We've had a lot of murder cases that have either been settled out for less than what they should be settled out. And I'm citing to the cases that we discussed earlier. And in addition to that, we've had cases that have been unreasonably prolonged. For example, we've had the Todd Pate case take 7 years to prosecute.
Wow.
From 2014 to 2021.
I get that it might be 7 years with appeals, where the defense attorney kept coming up. No, this is for the initial trial?
This is for the trial.
Wow. But there was all this bragging about it was the most efficient office that Kings County had ever had.
Wow, you must have been listening to Keith Fagundes.
Yeah, I did hear that at the debate, and he made that point more than once.
Yeah, he tends to repeat himself when he wants to prove a point, but it doesn't matter. Most reasonable people know that just because you say it a lot doesn't necessarily make something true. The truth is that it's not an efficient office, and homicides are falling through the cracks. And what I want to do is I want to get a homicide team together and have very experienced prosecutors handling the most serious of cases so that we can make sure that they stay on track and those cases are handled professionally and efficiently, and we give honor and justice to the victims and those left behind, or those family members left behind when their loved ones pass away.
Well, that's definitely important. It is kind of crazy to me that the culture has been allowed to happen in that way. You know, each office, each place you work has a particular culture, and that culture is largely led by the person in charge. Now, I have not been in that office. I'm taking your word for it and things I've read, but it is highly concerning at the very least. If I had direct experience, I could speak to it, but I just don't.
It is very concerning, and we see hints of it in the news.
Mm-hmm.
We see the Waggle complaint where he alleges sexual harassment by the current district attorney by sending 5,000 sexually explicit text messages to him. We see it in the high rate of turnover. We see it in the articles about the county administrative officer, Rebecca Campbell, who accused the county of emotional distress because the district attorney illegally investigated her after she was a whistleblower. All of these things are popping up, and we see glimpses of the toxicity in the office.
Is he well funded?
I don't believe so. The last I had heard was his campaign contributions have been $15,000, and he had about 30 in the bank when he started this campaign.
So how does that compare to what you're doing?
I've raised over $77,000 in this campaign.
Wow. And
that is truly a vote of confidence because people are putting their money where their mouth is.
No, that is very true. And in today's environment, it can be hard to raise money, so people are clearly concerned.
There's a very concerned contingency of people out there. And it's not just the citizens of Kings County, but people that do business in Kings County, because they want to make sure that there is stability in how laws are prosecuted. And they want to make sure that if they're a farmer and their tractor is vandalized or their gas is stolen, that there will be consequences for those types of actions.
So if people like you, what is your website?
My website is www.hacker, HACKER, the number 4, KCDA.com.
Okay. Go through that one more time, just so people, if they didn't have a pen, they now have a moment. One more time.
I did say it quite fast. It is www.hacker, HACKER, the number 4, KCDA.com.
Okay, we're down to about 30 seconds. Final thoughts.
I want to thank you for having me on the show, and thank all of those listeners that had an opportunity to hear our interview. And what I want to leave you with is, I am the DA that will follow the law. I understand that part of my job is to be limited by the Constitution, and that I must use small and limited government in order to bring justice to Kings County. I cannot have an expansive view on prosecution.
Well, I thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
I think that's just about a wrap. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXCX, the best talk in town. I thank you, folks.